Hello everybody, this is Berlinologist101. It was suggested by Stick and a few others that I put on another video on my channel, because I've been appearing on Shane's channel in the live stream, so I thought, well, I'll do one. And because I don't, I'm not really consistent with my videos. I don't knock them out sort of one a week, and because for me it takes a while, and you'll see with this video and others that I don't use any editing. But that's what I hope to be doing. There's a friend of mine who's offering to do some editing for me, because he's qualified in that field. I know he's got a degree in film. I don't know in what capacity exactly, but I'm going to see him, and we're going to be doing some more videos, and he's going to do the editing on it, because not only is he a really good a good friend, but he's really good at what he does. And so when I see him, we'll do some videos. Hopefully, I don't know if they will look as good and polished like Untold Past, or like Tick, or Mark Felton, but I hope to sort of improve just to get more views on my channel. So I'm going to start off with this one. So these aren't reviews, these are sort of talking points. Because I understand that Stick wants to go to Berlin. Now, I showed a book, one of those books. It was like a little pamphlet that I showed on the live stream, and but this time, because it was Shane's channel, I didn't want to start showing all this stuff. I wanted this to be specific for my personal channel. But I did want to show that one pamphlet. So anyway, this is the other book. Now, I've shown this before, but if you really want to get into Berlin, if you really want to be able to go to all the sites in Berlin, you really need to have this book. Now, this book isn't cheap. This book will run at like 30 quid, but it's worth every penny, simply because of the guy who did it, which is John Letizier, I think his name is. Tony Letizier. Tony Letizier. He's the guy that used to be the Governor General in Spandau, and it was on the and he was there when Rudolf Hess allegedly took his own life. Now, there is arguments for and against whether he did or he didn't, but we all know that governments lie, and they like to keep secrets. I don't know if you have any interest for the Iraq War, when Dr. Kelly allegedly committed suicide in the forest. Now, there's been some great documentaries on the mysterious death of Dr. David Kelly. But George Galloway, is also sort of a controversial MP. I don't know if he's still an MP, but he certainly was an MP. He's very outspoken. I always watch his YouTube channel because of things that he says, and because he's independent, he can say what he likes. And he's made a brilliant documentary on Dr. David Kelly. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I recommend that you go and watch it. It's called Killing Kelly. Killing Kelly. So if you type that in, you'll watch it. It's fantastic. Anyway, I'm going off at a tangent a little bit. I would recommend this book if, you might have to sort of shell out a little bit, but I tell you, it's worth every penny. And like I said, Tony Letizier put this book together. And it's one thing, because this is what you call a dip book. It's not a book that you would read from page 1 to, say, page 300. It's a book that you would sort of randomly pick a page and you'd sort of go through it. Now, if you want to make a tour of Berlin and you want to make it that it's memorable, I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. Say like here, this photograph. See, there, that road there is where all the government buildings used to be. And this is the Luftwaffe building. It's still standing. It's still there. You can see here is where the death strip is, the no man's land. And that here is West Berlin, and this is East Berlin. And these photos were taken just after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it's history in the making. It's capturing history as it was at the time. And I mean, you could spend hours and hours and hours going through this book, but it's fantastic. I haven't sort of picked out a lot of things like, say for example, the stadium, which is Albert Speer designed, Hitler's architect, is still standing, it's still there. And if you want to get into all the details, like this here, I can't remember the name of it. Let's see. Here we go. I can't remember the name of this station, but that's the station before it was bombed, and that's what's left. It's just a relic. You see it here, but it's a famous tourist attraction. You go into Berlin, you want to see this station. This here is where the old Reichschancellery was, and they built the new Reichschancellery, and you'll recognise it because they specially built a balcony for Hitler to, salute and inspect the troops marching past. So when you go to Berlin, this is the kind of thing that you want to be looking out for. But a lot of these buildings are no longer there, so you need to know what the locations are, and you have to sort of use your own imagination. And it would be a good idea to actually take the book with you. That's how highly I rate this book. I won't go through everything. I mean, it's hours and hours of stuff and maps and locations and names of buildings and everything like that. You'd really have to make a plan in advance before you actually go. And I'd recommend, even though this book weighs a little bit, is to take it with you. When you go there to Berlin, these maps are given away for free. You see that? I'd recommend you take this map with you, because then you can mark out the locations of where it is that you want to go. I don't know if you can see this. I don't know if I'm getting this all in the camera shot, but if you look carefully, you can see you've got a shape of a head. So if it goes all around like that, you see the shape of the head. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, it goes round there, except the nose. There's no nose. It goes down there and then it goes down into the neck. I rode on a bike all around there, and I'll tell you, I was exhausted when I finished. But I rode a bike because you can hire bikes out there, and that's a good thing if you're prepared to do it, because you get to see a lot when you ride a bike. I don't know how long it took me, but let me tell you, I was exhausted at the end of it. So when you go to Berlin, they will hand out these maps. I recommend you take one, and then you want to mark out the route of where it is that you want to go. So you'll be prepared. You won't be wasting time when you get there. You want to say something? Okay. So, God, I've got so much stuff here. James P. O'Donnell, he wrote The Bunker. I mentioned this in my other video, but it's worth mentioning again. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend that you go and watch it. It's called The Bunker. It's on YouTube, so you won't have to, download it and pay money for it or or buy it on DVD. You can just watch it. And James P. O'Donnell was the person that actually walked into the bunker just after the war had ended, and it was filling up with water. So this is the book that I've mentioned before, and this is where I found out about the lady who vanished out of this book. But I've got the other one. This is called Die Catacomb. Die Catacomb. And it's got there his name, James P. O'Donnell. Now, look at this book. Look how thick that is. And it's all in German. Now, I'd probably have to read this several times just to get through this book, you know, to understand what this book is actually saying, because my German isn't as fluent as my English is. But I'm determined to do it, and how long this will take me, good God only knows. But in order to know as much as, say, somebody does the Jack the Ripper tour in London, you're going to have to go through books like this in order to find out as much as you can regarding the Hitler bunker. There is also this is something I need to, now the thought has just come into my mind, there's also the underground touring. If you're looking at the Nazi past in Berlin, you need to go underground. So there's lots of underground bunkers. I'm not talking about the Hitler bunker, but there are underground bunkers, and they actually do tours around in the bunker, in these bunkers, and it is like stepping back in time. You actually see how things were during that era, from say 1933 to 1945, because before the war is just as important as what happened during the war. It's a very important point that I'm making. Okay, now post-war, in my mind, is just as interesting as what happened during the war and before the war. So I've got here, there was a turning point, I would say, after the war ended, you know, because there was this thing about how suspicious the West was to the East, and from the East to the West, you know, the Soviet Union was suspicious of the collective West, and the collective West was suspicious of the former Soviet Union. So they would spy on each other, and Berlin was the place to do it. And so what happened is that the CIA were prevalent, as were MI6, in Berlin, because Berlin, for those that don't know or who don't have an old map of the Cold War years, Berlin was like an island, and in order to get to Berlin, you had to go through East German territory in order to get to Berlin itself. And then, of course, Berlin itself was divided, and the Soviet East Germany, they had the largest chunk, and Berlin West was divided into 3 zones. So you had the American zone, you had the British zone, and you had the French zone. And what they would do, they would spy on each other, because it was the perfect place for spies to be, because it was right in the heart of East Germany. So what I got here, I've got a couple of things I'd like to show you. Say this book, for example, Die CIA stellt in Berlin die Weichen. Now, I don't know, because I haven't read this book, but the reason why I bought it was because I want to know more about what the CIA, you know, what were their operations in Berlin? What were they doing exactly? I know that they wanted to know a lot more during the 50s, and they actually built a tunnel from West Berlin into East Berlin. And one of the spies, the famous, I think the Cambridge 6, one of the spies whose name is not on the, you know, I can't mention, you know, because I don't remember his name, unfortunately. I will find it out. He told the Soviets that there was a tunnel from West Berlin into East Berlin. So the KGB knew about the tunnel, but the GRU weren't informed because they didn't want to tell them for fear of exposing the spy who told the Soviets that they were being spied on, and that a tunnel was built right under the noses of the Soviets and the East German authorities. So it was going for like 18 months or so. So they were, they tapped in on the telephone exchange, and they heard all the messages and everything. And but what they didn't do was to tell the GRU, so they wouldn't, they would take their time. Like if you have a fear of somebody listening in on your telephone conversations, you would then sort of edit what you're saying. You'd be more conscientious of what you're saying. So they didn't, and because they didn't do that, they spoke more freely, and that's how the West, the collective West, got the information. And they were taking hours and hours and hours of messages going backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. That even after that tunnel was exposed and they found out, and they had the press there to see, and they saw all these machines, all these electronics and everything, and they went down into the tunnel and everything. It wasn't until the 60s, because this was in the mid-50s, it wasn't until the 60s they were still deciphering the messages that were going backwards and forwards. So you can imagine how many hours that they had. And after they'd recorded, say, a session, they would fly that information from Berlin to London, and then they would start deciphering the information. That's how big it was. But the CIA, why I mention it and why I have this book is because after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the CIA bought pieces of the wall itself. And you'd ask yourself the question, why? So I've got a picture, well, I've got a DVD, but it's because I don't have any, to film it all, and all of that takes hours and hours and hours. I'd rather show you stuff. So I've got this here of pieces of the Berlin Wall, and these were prefabs, and they were put together in, I think, 1975. There was the person that did it was informed at the end of when the Berlin Wall came down. His son telephoned his father and saying, "Dad, I'm in West Berlin and I'm calling you." And of course he was absolutely shocked. But anyway, the point is this: the CIA actually bought pieces of the Berlin Wall, and they took it to Virginia, to Langley, and where they have placed it is at the entrance of the headquarters of the CIA. And of course, to get into the headquarters of the CIA, you have to walk past the wall. It was a deliberate, it's a deliberate message, as if to say, we helped bring down the Berlin Wall. Now, I haven't got much information on this. I don't really know much about. I can only speculate. But that is an obvious. You don't have to read 10 books to see that the CIA were principally behind the fall of the Berlin Wall, and but there just isn't much information on it until somebody from the CIA writes a memoir. But that's the reason why I've got this book here. It's one of the reasons. But this is just a small incident. This happened in 1948. So here I've got Berlinologischer Garten, which means zoo station. Now, if anybody knows anything about the station, that station was notorious for drug deals and for prostitution. And if you know of a film called Christian F., which I highly recommend that you watch, then watch it, because if you're into horror, that is a horror, because it's about a 15-year-old girl who's prostituting herself for a heroin. Now, this is a book. I only just picked it up because I got a few copies of the book. It's Christian F., and it's got a picture, but this is just a model. That's not Christian F. F stands for Felcherino. That's her surname. and she actually didn't really like being called Christian F. She wanted to be called Falcherino. When she was asked about the, excuse me, when she was asked about the film, she said, "You're better off reading the book." But I think the film is great, and I recommend that you watch it. And one of the reasons I say that is because this book is out of print. You can't get this book. There is a book called Zoo Station, but like that's the second translation. The best translation is this one. I highly recommend you getting it if you've got the, if you really want to get into, you know, Berlin history, and not just the history from an economical or political or from a war perspective, but real people. And this is one of those real people stories, which is very, very tragic. If you can read German, then you can get the German book. I mean, this is part of German literature. You know, they're reading this stuff at school in the German schools. I have copies of books that are in German, and I have the English translation. And you get that thing of translating. First you read the German, and then you read the English, and then you read the German, and then you read the English. And I mean, it's a really good way of actually improving your German or any language if you're doing language learning. It's a really good technique to actually use, where you're using two books that say the same thing, and you will also notice that there might be certain paragraphs and things that they've omitted, or that the translation doesn't quite match how it puts itself across. So you'll see it from one perspective, which is the translation, but then the German one gets a lot deeper. The interview that was given by this girl, that's what she really looks like, was put on YouTube. And you know what? I was fearful of listening in, because why I say that is because it's almost like going to a therapist with the patient talking to the therapist, and there's me sitting in on it. You know, I felt really a bit uncomfortable, and now I'm in two minds, because it would be really interesting to actually hear what she's actually saying, because then you'll get into the very, very heart of her story, because it's her that's saying it, and it's not going through the journalists who took the recordings of what she was saying, and then they polished it up and wrote their book. So anyway, Christian F. This one, it actually says "Wir Kinder vom Bahnhof Zoo," which means us kids from Zoo Station. It's a very important part of Berlin history if you really want to get into it. Okay, here's another one. It's the Glienicke Bridge. Now this is a shot because I showed another picture of the Glienicke Bridge, and you can see it a lot clearly there. There were only 3 exchanges on the Glienicke Bridge. There weren't like hundreds of exchanges, there weren't. And there's 2 exchanges that were done on the Glienicke Bridge were done in the 80s, but the first one was done in 1961 when John F. Kennedy was still president of the United States, so it was before his assassination. And here is the Strangers on the Bridge, which was filmed in A Bridge of Spies. If you haven't seen that film, I tell you, you have to see it. Steven Spielberg did a fantastic job. And this is a diary of Jason Donovan, who was representing Colonel Abel, because he said, look, it's best that we don't execute this spy, because we can do an exchange. And sure enough, Gary Powers, in his U-2 plane was shot down over Russian territory, and hence they were able to make an exchange. And there were 2 people. There was two exchanges. By that I mean they exchanged Gary Powers for Colonel Abel at the Glienicke Bridge, but there was a third person that was that went through Checkpoint Charlie, and this is the person that's least spoken about, and I'd love to know a little bit more of that person, of who he was, why he was arrested, and why John F. Kennedy refused to see him. It's part of history. Okay, let's see. All right. Documents on British policy overseas. Berlin in the Cold War, 1948 to 1990. And this is a really thin volume, and I tell you, it's got a lot of names of people that were in government at the time. It's not just the British government, but the German government as it was at the time. And it sort of says a little, or it doesn't really say that much in the way of information. But what it does say, or what the part I haven't really looked into yet because I haven't had the chance, is they put it all on a disc. So you've got to go on. You've got to put the disc, get it off the disc and read it off a monitor screen. And I have to admit, I'm not really a big fan of doing that. I hate reading, like having a Kindle or something like that. And apparently Kindles aren't selling as much as they used to because people prefer to buy books. So it's one to think about. Yeah, look at this. Gosh, I wonder how much time we've got. Anyway, look. Violations of human rights, illegal acts, incidents at the sector border in Berlin since the building of the Berlin Wall, the 13th of August 1961 to the 15th of August 1962. This has got a stamp here of the 25th of November 1963. Look what it says here. Published on the behalf of the government of the Federal Republic of Germany by the Federal Ministry of All German Questions, Bonn and Berlin. I bought this for £6. And I bought this off Amazon, and all I had was that title. There was no synopsis, there was nothing, no reviews, nothing. So it was a blind buy. I had no idea what I was getting until I got it. And when I got it, bloody hell, it blew my mind, because I thought, this sort of stuff is the stuff you want to find. If you really want to know about Berlin, this is the sort of stuff you have to look for. And it's got really important pictures, like, say for example, the map. Berlin map, the sectors, like, because you've got like it's Checkpoint Charlie, but they've got like different sectors, and the Americans gave them all different names. Now I don't know what all the names are, but it's something to really get into when you actually start looking into this stuff, when you really want to get into it. There is Peter Fechter. That I mentioned. There's a book written about him, and I reviewed it in one of my other YouTube presentations. And in The Last Battle, written by Cornelius Ryan, he dedicates the book to Peter Fechter. And there he is, lying on the floor, on the ground there, trying to get across the Berlin Wall. And you see the East German border guards carrying him away. It's tragic. And one of the sad things was, they threw a first aid kit because nobody could get over to the other side, and the East German border guards were afraid to actually approach Peter Fechter, and he literally bled to death. I've actually got one of his family members in the 80s talking about him, only briefly though. It's a really good thing. And here, let's see the guy's name, Günther Litvin. That was the first person that was killed trying to get across into West Berlin. It's tragic. It's absolutely sad what happened here. Then, oh God, this is Bernaustrasse, which means Bernau Street. And what was happening was they were jumping. They had the wall there. The wall is just here. That's the wall. So these buildings are part of the wall. And what was happening was there were people jumping out of the windows. And at the bottom you had those from the fire service with like sheets, and holding the sheets out for the people to jump into the sheets. And there were people jumping from the top floor. Now this is never mentioned, so I'm mentioning this for the first time. When they jump out of the window and they jump into the sheet, they still hit the ground. They still hit the ground because of the weight and because of the height that they jump from. So when they landed into the sheet, they were still breaking bones, because the firemen that were holding the sheet couldn't hold it tight enough for them to land into it, so they wouldn't hurt themselves. But they did. So they would then rush to the hospital. The other one was the ropes. They'd have ropes from the windows, and they slide down the ropes, and they get their hands would burn. You know, they get burned from the ropes, because they didn't put any knots in the ropes, so you could sort of lower yourself down from the rope. So they were just, because they were so anxious to get into the West, so they had rope burn in their hands, and it was pretty bad. And so what they've done was they've then bricked up the walls. All the people were forced from the buildings and moved to other apartments, and then eventually they knocked down all these houses. These houses were eventually, and these apartment buildings were knocked down. If you go to Berlin now, it's just a field. That's all it is. It's just a field. But if you know your history and you've got these pictures like that, you'll know what Berlinologist101 looked like. And people in Berlin will know Berlinologist101 because it's a famous street where a lot of the escapes occurred. Oh, look at this one. See here, look. When they built the wall, or it was a fence to start off with, it was a barbed wire fence, what they did was they put these extra fences over the wall. Why did they do that? Because what the East Germans and the West Germans were doing, they were waving to each other like that. Now, to stop doing that, they put, that's how cruel these people were. They didn't want this. They didn't want to do it because they were family members. Family members were split up, so you had your grandparents from the other side, and you know, and the grandchildren. They couldn't see their relatives, so all they were doing were like waving and you know, having handkerchiefs and waving like that. So what they did was they built like an extra fence so that you couldn't see into East Berlin. That's how tragic it all was at the time. So anyway, and this is going into the deep stuff of Berlin history. I mean, you've got to get pamphlets and documents like this to actually know what actually went on. And I've got three more here. Look. Zur Situation in der Sowjetzone nach dem 13. August 1961. That means the situation in the Soviet zone after the 13th of August 1961. And I bought this off Amazon. When I saw it, because I had this one, and I saw a picture of this one, I knew then I had to order this. And I saw, oh, 15 quid, 15 quid. Oh, I'll have that for 15 quid. Then I clicked on it to buy it, and it was 35 quid. It's 20 quid to post it. And that's when you're sort of like scratching your head, rubbing your chin, thinking, oh, shall I buy it? You know, because you really don't want to spend that money. And I thought, I'll click on it, and I bought it. And then I need to find out two of them are the same. Had I read it properly when it actually said the title of what they were selling, I might not have bought it. But in hindsight, I'm glad I did, because things like this are really, really rare. You won't see stuff like this. You won't. It'll probably be another 2 or 3 years before I see something like this. And that on eBay it might go for 60 quid or 80 quid or something like that. So you've got all the newspaper cuttings from the Times, look. All the newspaper cuttings. And then you got all that. All the writing. So it says Dokumente, which is documents. Documents. So you get a flavour of what it was at the time, as it was occurring at the time. It's not filtered, it's not diluted, you know, through people writing history and rewriting history again and again and again. You're going back to the very source, to the very root, as it occurred, as it was at the time. And so I'm really, really glad that I ended up having the courage to spend 35 quid for these documents, as I call them, documents. Oh God. Jeffrey McDermott, look at this. He was the ambassador in Berlin at the time as the Berlin Wall came up. Recently, Her Majesty's Minister in Berlin. He published this book in 1963. This is the first published, and he was told he had to leave. He had to give up the post and come back to the UK because there might have been something that he said, or something that was misinterpreted, or something that went on at the time, and Her Majesty's government didn't want to be embarrassed because they saw how sensitive the situation was in Berlin as the Berlin Wall was going up. So they asked him to give up his post and come back to the UK. Now, again, you know, because there's so much, I've got so much stuff here, but there's so much to read. But it gives you the details and it gives you the reasons why. Again, you get the flavour of the time. You're going back in time, and this is what research is all about. If you really want to get into the research and you really want to know what was happening as it happened, then you need to get sort of books like this and documents and old newspapers, as much as you can, even diaries and letters, to find out actually what was going on when these things actually occurred at the time. Some things don't always go the way you want them to, and this is one of them. Great title, great photograph of the picture of the Berlin Wall, where you see over through to the other side, which you'll be able to see into no man's land, and you see like all these like sort of bits have been chipped away, and what they call is they call them wall pickers. Wall pickers are people, well, they have a chisel and a mallet, and they'll bang bits of the Berlin Wall and it chip away, and hopefully they get a big chunk because then they can sell it. But there's a lot of fraud going on. What they would do, they would get a chunk of concrete, spray it with some spray paint, you know, to make it look authentic, you know, because there was a lot of graffiti on the Berlin Wall, and then they'll sell that. Of course, that's not authentic piece of Berlin Wall. So the only way you'll get something authentic is perhaps for you to actually go to the Berlin Wall itself and chisel away a little bit. But that would be tragic because that is part of Berlin history. You'll be taking away something from Berlin history. And for the people that are tourists that want to see more of the Berlin Wall, they'll have less to see because you've actually taken something from the Berlin Wall. So that would be a tragedy. Anyway, this book is a novel. You know, I thought it was going to be something more than that. I was hoping that there was going to be, you know, a story of somebody who actually escaped from East Berlin into West Berlin, and then they would write their story. But no, this is a fictionalized account of an escape from East Berlin into West Berlin. Yeah, let's see. Just take a time out. Okay. So what we got now is with some of the books that I've got here are sort of written by scholars or written by people that have got like degrees and are professors in universities and stuff like that. So a lot of the books that they write will be dry. You know, they're not writers like a novelist would write a novel. They are very dry in the language that they use. And the language is very specific. It's almost like if a lawyer were to write something, he has that lawyer speak, and other lawyers will understand what they're saying, what he's saying. But if you were someone in the gallery or in the public gallery, and you was to listen to what the lawyer actually has to say, then you might not always understand what they say. And it's the same with doctors, and it's the same with politicians. So these books may be very difficult, maybe not so difficult, but you have to be able to read between the lines and behind the words to actually understand what they say. So, American policy in the division of Germany, the clash with the Russian over reparations. Reparations means where a country has to pay money to the countries that say Germany had invaded, like Russia. And this is what the Russians did. When they actually got to Berlin, at the end of the war, they started to dismantle all the machines in the factories and ship them off to Russia. That's why East Germany was so poor, because a lot of the machines in the factories were being taken away and shipped to Russia. And of course you can't produce anything. If you don't have a machine, you can't produce anything. What can you produce? And therefore you're going to suffer, and the economy suffers. And this is a book that will actually explain a little bit of actually what went on those years from, say, 1945 to 1948, 1949. Here's another one. America and the Shaping of German Society, 1945 to 1955. Crucial years, because they were under occupation. In fact, Germany's still under occupation. There are American troops still in Germany to this day. You know, and you hear about the pipeline that got blown up. Well, that was the Americans. They blew it up. You know, and you'd think, well, why would Americans do that to their own allies? But it's history. It actually happened. So this is a shaping of the society. That's why the West is so on capitalistic system. So you've got the capitalistic system. It's been shaped. So the culture that we're experiencing today has been shaped by others. And here's a good synopsis or an overview of what they actually say. It says here, the decade 1945 to 1955 is indisputably one of the most important in the modern Germans as well as European history. What is less clear, however, is given what we now know about Germany in the wake of the reunification. It is a degree to which the United States and other Allied victors shaped the institutions, policies and culture in the Federal Republic of Germany in the crucial period to what extent was Americanization, modernization and normalization, can't even say, congruent. The work focuses on the rule of the United States and of the Americans in both official and unofficial capacities in shaping the political culture and early foundations of the Federal Republic of Germany from 1945 to 1955. It draws together the work of well-known scholars, both Germans and Americans, along with the reflective accounts of the actual participants in the witnessing of the period. I mean, that really says it all. I mean, you know, to sort of like digest all of that, it's really getting into the essence of understanding of how European history, German history, Berlin history is being shaped, and how history is like a guide to all those that want to understand the society of now as it happens today. So this book is great of value. Again, I haven't I've got so much stuff, but I've got an overview. I mean, the title and the back of the book tells me as much as I'm going to, for me to actually understand what actually the meaning is of Americanization and capitalism in Germany as it stands today. So we're nearly coming to the end. Driving the Soviets up the wall. Hope M. Harrison. Hope M. Harrison was a scholar, somebody from a university. She was able to go to Germany. She wanted to write about Germany, the Berlin Wall, and this was, I think, as the Berlin Wall actually came down, because she was on the plane, and as the news came over the airwaves to say that the Berlin Wall would come down, they were able to fly in airspace that the pilots were weren't able to fly. There was like parts of Berlin, because it was like a corridor and you had to stay within the corridor. You know, if you flew outside that corridor, you know, there's chances are you could get shot down. So when this actually occurred, there was cheers in the plane, and everyone was, you know, and they were singing the German national anthem. Well, this book is about why the Berlin Wall was built, because the Berlin Wall was built wasn't just, in fact, that was Khrushchev's reason. Khrushchev's reason was to avoid World War III. That's why the Berlin Wall was built. But for Walter Ulbricht, who was the head of the East German state, he wanted to build the Berlin Wall because he was hemorrhaging people from leaving East Germany, because the Berlin Wall is symbolic, but there was a fence or a border between the two Germanys. So you had East Germany, West Germany. So they built a fence, and nobody was allowed to cross through that border. However, they were allowed to get through Berlin. So what they did was, or those that wanted to escape, they just had to get the tube, as it was, you know, the U-Bahn as they call it, and walk into West Berlin, and they were able to, you know, leave East Germany that way. So, you know, even you've got like lots of refugees coming across the channel from France into England, and you've got people from Libya coming from Libya, and they're going into Italy, and from Italy they want to get into Germany. So I mean, you know, history is repeating itself. So what he wanted to do was he wanted to build a wall to stop people from leaving. So effectively, East Germany would be an open-air prison. So what happened was he was constantly, Walter Ulbricht, that was the head of the East German state, was constantly going to Moscow, badgering the authorities and Khrushchev. We got to build a wall. We got to build a wall. We have to, because we're